Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Executive Director of CCSSO, Chris Minnick.
All right, you guys can do better than that. A little more noise maybe, huh? We're excited to talk about assessment, yeah? All right. Good afternoon. It's great to see y'all. I'm so thrilled that so many of you have been able to come together to talk about what's next in statewide student assessment as well as assessment within school districts across the country. I want to start today by thanking our team at CCSSO, in particular Scott Norton, Fen Chow, and Carla Toy. Please give them a round of applause. I also want to thank our planning committee led by Jennifer Stafford and Patty Reese for coordinating this year's program. Please give them a round of applause. So as we get ready to talk about the future of assessment over the next 2 days, I think it's important to reflect on the past 6 to 7 years as we've been working together to build higher quality assessments across the country. When we entered this work in 2010, we had 3 goals. The first was to make sure that tests were aligned with our higher academic standards that we had just adopted across the country. The second was to make sure that these tests were of higher quality in driving the type of instruction that we were interested in seeing across the country. And third, we were interested in being able to make comparisons within states and across states for how our students were doing across the country. Today, states across the country have stepped up and responded. We have better tests in almost every state, and those of you who are working on adjusting your assessments are targeting a higher bar for those tests. We have tests that now are aligned to the higher standards that we wrote, and we're beginning to see progress on making comparability essential as part of our systems across the country. Under the Every Student Succeeds Act, states have even more opportunity to act flexibly, but together in generating higher assessment systems across the country for our kids. For example, the new English language proficiency assessments that we've all created are now part of the Title I in ESSA. That's something that we will all have to wrestle with and deal with. So now every school will be judged as part of their Title I accountability system on their ELP progress. I think that's a good change for the country. ESSA also allows you to take the time to get this right. While we are operating on a short short period to get a plan in place for ESSA, back when I was working in a state, we would have 2 to 3 years to generate a new assessment. Now you guys have like 6 weeks usually. But I think ESSA gives us a chance to take a step back and make sure our assessment systems are aligned with what our constituents want, but also more importantly, what our kids need across the country. Several states are also looking at the innovative assessment pilots, following New Hampshire's lead, thinking about what they might do in the area of performance-based testing or other innovations that would get us better information on how students are doing and use less time giving those assessments. I think everyone here today, from state assessment directors to their partners to the testing companies, has an important role in making sure our kids have high-quality assessments across the country. Each person's expertise can make the test better or make administration a little easier. I know together we can ensure that our assessment system provides meaningful measures and feedback that propels our education system forward. At CCSSO, we remain committed to this agenda. We do this by working directly with you, either through the SCASs or through this conference or through technical assistance. We are committed to making sure that ESSA is a moment forward for the country, not a step backward. I'm going to wrap up my remarks by just a quick story for you. For those of you who are in a state, you know, state agencies often get the short end of the stick in terms of public opinion. We are not always seen as leaders. And I will tell you, I was having a conversation with someone in D.C. Where they were talking about whether or not I thought this would be our moment to actually step forward and begin closing gaps for children across the country. Begin making sure that our assessments are aligned at the goals of what we want for our kids. And I said, well, you know what? We already had done that. We've already begun that conversation. And we don't get the credit we deserve for the work we've done over the last 6 years. So what I said to this person was, yeah, I actually think the states are going to do it this time. I think we're going to begin to see work across the country and work on assessment that does create the next generation of expectations for our students. I think it's easy to get tired in this work because it seems like everybody's telling you that we need to do more, we need to do more. The bottom line is our kids need us to do more. And so that's the most important part of this conversation. And I look forward to being in those conversations with you for the next 2 days. I get the honor this afternoon to introduce our keynote speaker, Secretary Pedro Rivera from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Secretary Rivera was nominated by Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf and confirmed by the state Senate in June of 2015. Previously, he served as the superintendent of the school district of Lancaster, and during his tenure, Secretary Rivera was honored by the White House as a champion of change, as one of the 10 Hispanic leaders in the United States that were doing, quote, extraordinary work in education. His education agenda focuses on providing opportunities for success for all students and finding ways to engage and bring about a greater equity towards their school districts here in Pennsylvania. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Rivera.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's try that one more time. I know it's hot out there. I know we just had a big lunch, but one more time. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. All right, good afternoon, good afternoon. First, I have to also take a moment and congratulate the committee for pulling this together. Congratulations. We now, get to get started and enjoy the fruit of your labor. And if you will indulge me, I'd also like to take a moment and thank the servers. They did an amazing job today serving us lunch. Let's give them a round of applause. This is a big crowd, and they ran through it and made sure everyone was nourished and and engaged for the afternoon. So thank you so much for doing that. And it's especially important to always start off a speech like this with a celebration, because you want to get the energy level as high as you can. Because we know whenever you're having a conversation about assessment, there are all types of responses, emotional responses that can be engaged. And if you've not experienced this, walk into a local school district, into the central offices and tell them, hey, I'm here to talk assessment. If they don't slam the door, just watch the smile on your faces drop. Better yet, you walk into a parent-teacher association meeting and say, today's the day we get to do the assessment PowerPoint. And take a look at the look on their faces. If you're really, really brave, walk into a student association meeting and say, can we talk assessment? You might make it out of there in one piece. If not, they'll kill you on social media. So, I've learned probably the only one conversation that's scarier to have now. In the past year and a half, I've gone from just pure education to serving education under the governor, is walking into an office and saying, hey, I'm from the state, I'm here to help you. So that being said, I get to come here and say, I'm from the government and I'm here to talk assessment. So it's just a double whammy standing up here and engaging with you all today. But you know what, when we're really engaging in this discussion around equity and this discussion around assessment and this discussion, around accountability in general, we understand fully why it is there's such an emotional response. We know that for a couple weeks each year, teachers engage and schools engage. They have pep rallies, and they serve breakfast in the classroom, and kids can chew gum and eat gummy bears. We check attendance meticulously. We want to make sure we get every single one of those students tested and off the checklist to make our participation benchmarks. And the kids see this. The kids feel this. The families see this. The families feel this. So the student wakes up every morning and he has this tingling, in his belly, and he looks at, his parents and he says, can you opt me out? And the parent looks at the kid and says, boy, I'm the Secretary of Education. There is no way I can opt you out of the test. Besides, you are a bright, middle school, Latino male. I can auction you off to the highest bidder anywhere in Pennsylvania. You are a much needed subgroup, buddy. So, when we think of this emotional reaction and emotional response, it's understandable. It's understandable that each and every day we've created such high stakes behind this assessment, such high stakes behind this assessment plan, that it makes us nervous. I mean, not only do the kids have butterflies in their stomachs, but guess what? The teachers, the administrators, the administrative teams, the school communities, we get butterflies in our stomachs. We clear out rooms for test security. We verify rosters. We sharpen hundreds, if not thousands, of number 2 pencils because we don't want there to be any excuses as to why we don't do well. But one of the things we've not engaged in around this narrative around assessment is why we assess. So when you think of students asking to opt out and parents who are actually opting out their students, what if we started by answering the question, why do we assess? So let's say instead of telling communities we assess to ensure our kids are proficient or advanced and not basic and below basic, let's say we were assessing to not only have an impact on a school performance profile or a state report card system. Let's say we didn't assess to see how our schools and their communities are doing each and every year or year to year. What if we say we didn't assess so that we can have some indicator for property value, but we assessed to ensure all of our kids were college and career ready by the time they graduated high school, regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of language proficiency, regardless of education needs, regardless of zip code. Now, I bet you, if we were to have this conversation around assessment and we shared with families, this is why we assess. We want to make sure our system of education, I want to make sure what I'm doing in my school district is ensuring that our kids are better the day they leave us than they were the day they started. And over the next few days, you're going to be having deeper conversation around creating assessment systems of assessment, right? You're going to be having conversations around the future of assessment. You're going to be having conversations around what we're going to invest, what changes needed, and what should we no longer invest in. These are the conversations we've been engaging in for the past year here in PA, which is why we're especially proud to host you all here in this forum and over the next few days in sessions. Because ultimately we realized we moved away as educators, we moved away from explaining the reason we assess and sometimes even believing that there's a cause and the real rationale behind assessment. Because why we assess as educators before standardized tests, we walked into a classroom and we wanted to know where our students were the day they started and how well they were progressing throughout the year. And when we did that well, we adjusted instruction to differentiate, we focused on students. Sometimes we engaged students with additional help or gave them work that was a bit harder. So what if our educational system, nationally and locally here at the states, started to address assessment in the same way? What if we went to schools and first and foremost, we're honest? Say, you know what? Here's what we know. What's measured is done. So we want to create a measurement system that's going to ensure we're looking at our educational system holistically across the board to ensure our kids are getting the highest quality of education possible throughout the Commonwealth. What if we moved our school, for us it's the school performance profile, if you have any system of school accounting, you'll know what this is. What if we moved our school accounting system, our school performance profile, from a system that's 90% reliant on standardized tests in some cases, to a system that focuses on strategies that work? Because guess what, educators? We know what success strategies look like, and we know how to measure them. We know what early warning indicators are, and we know how to measure them. So why not borrow from those best practices and engage in a system that measures what we know allows students to progress from year to year, from pre-kindergarten through 12th grade, while meeting rigorous standards that will prepare them for life after the K-12 system? We know students who can read on grade level have a greater likelihood of graduating on time and with the skills needed to be successful than students who don't. We know that students who enter their middle years with math proficiency, strong in numeracy, are much more likely to take advanced math courses in middle school and high school than those who do not. We know that attendance is an indicator that will show not only success through your K-12 system, but success in college and in the workplace. We know that access to high-quality programs are as much an indicator for future success than many of the other indicators we currently measure. So we know this. And guess what? The beauty of education is that we are expected as educators to steal great ideas from each other. We send folks to your state all the time to steal. I read your articles, I read the books you publish, and I steal. I visit school districts, engage with administrators and community members and students, and we steal. Matter of fact, educators are so good at stealing, we don't call it stealing. We actually coined a term. We call it best practice. Sounds a lot better than stealing. So take all that back. I go to your district and I borrow best practice and engage it here at the state. So what if we were honest through these systems of assessment, these systems of support, and asked ourselves, why do we assess? Because if we're answering the question, we are assessing to ensure that students are prepared to enter college and career, to enter the workforce, to work towards an industry-recognized certificate, 2-year degree, 4-year degree, and beyond, to earn gainful employments, because we know not only will they be successful, but they will transform our communities, including our education community, for generations to come. Now, if we said that's why we assess, or that's why we create a system of assessment, would your plan look differently? I know when we started asking ourselves that question, our plan started to change. So let's talk about what you're going to engage in over the next few days in relation to leadership, because this is an extremely important area of discussion for not only our secretaries like myself, but superintendents across the country. You know, we know if you just take a look at the definition of leadership, the definition of leadership is the art of making a declaration and having others follow you. So what better way than what you're doing here today to assist in making a declaration and getting others on board? So first, you collect data. And let's think of data a bit differently. We know that data tells a story. Data tells a story. You know, whether you're behind the scenes and you just, create spreadsheets, or you like to, create colorful spreadsheets and then pass it on to someone else who will create a narrative, and then pass it to someone else who will turn that narrative into a message. When you think of branding of education across the Commonwealth with an informed consumer, because we are serving the most informed consumer we've ever had in the past, and probably the most informed consumer of any consumers that are out there. I mean, you can Google anything nowadays. Unfortunately, we don't take as much time to use our data to tell a story ourselves, so everyone else fills that vacuum, and they tell that story themselves. So first, in this system that you're creating, know that data tells a story. We know that good stories create movements. If a leader makes a statement, makes a declaration, and others follow, a good leader tells great stories, makes great statements, and more individuals will follow. So we know that the systems you're going to create, the systems you're going to discuss, will forge a path or kind of serve as the bumpers for that story, for that narrative, for that movement. And then the assessments. Why are they important? Because like every great educator knows, assessments provide and create checkpoints that allow the ability to calibrate as needed, to adjust as needed, to celebrate successes as needed, and to ensure our end goal is still our end goal, and we're on trajectory to meet that goal. So over the next few days, you're going to be engaging in some really deep conversations. And it's going to be easy to want to default back to checking boxes, right? You have a list, you have to get it done, you have a timeline, you have to meet that timeline. But the challenge for leaders in this room, the challenge for those of you who are educators, responsible for educators, responsible for the next generation of youth, is to move beyond checking boxes and understanding that assessment, systems of assessment, data, accountability, all serve to create a message, to forge a path, and ultimately to ensure that our students are better the day they leave us than they were the day they started. So you have a lot riding on you. You thought you were getting a free lunch this afternoon. I have news for you. There are no free lunches. That's probably the third worst, thing I'll share today. But know this, that the work you're going to engage in today, the work that you're going to engage in as leaders today will create, forge, and prepare our leaders for tomorrow. So thank you. I wish you lots of luck and continue to fight the good fight. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Sit down. Okay, so I thought we would wrap this up by just having a little conversation. These chairs, you sort of fall right into them, so sorry about that. So you talked a little bit about the stories that data tell. What's the story that you're trying to tell here in Pennsylvania, and what types of things do you want to use the information that you're going to get back from the assessments to tell?
Absolutely. So we here in the Commonwealth have been given an amazing opportunity to look at and engage stakeholders around how we assess local schools and districts across the Commonwealth. And as I shared, from elementary through high school, in elementary school, there are some data sets that are responsible for 90% of the performance, quote unquote, score, for many of our schools. And we then realized if you're going to measure 90%, if you're going to have 90% alignment to one standard or one system of measurement, it's all schools are going to focus in on. Mm-hmm. So as a result, we've noticed schools and districts that have reduced humanities courses. We have seen cases where students were pulled out of industry certificate programs to remediate around the standardized assessment. We have seen a growing discussion around opting out. So what we are currently engaged in is creating a system or a profile that is much more holistic, and based on many of the strategies that we know lead to not only high school completion, but certificate attainment and college degree attainment as well.
Yeah, and so access is obviously something that's really important to you, as you talked about in your remarks. So Are you thinking about an access metric? I mean, obviously, I don't want you to commit. These are just like a couple hundred people out here, but
don't tweet out any
right,
commitments.
But just thinking about how you make access more a priority for schools and districts. How are you thinking about that?
Absolutely. So we know if we create this system of assessment, and we've been working both with some amazing stakeholders. We engaged over 1,000 stakeholders, everything from educators to industry leaders, parents, advocacy groups, administrators, to really engage in a really deep dialogue. And we met them where they were geographically. And so when we looked at access, we saw this as an opportunity to create conditions, because what you measured ultimately creates conditions of learning and conditions of leadership throughout school districts. So the methods or the systems we're looking to put in place to measure, will take into account if we're looking at equitable access to students across the Commonwealth. So we're focusing on a specific metrics for English language learners. We're looking at meeting the needs and specific metrics around students with special needs. We're looking at access to high quality programs, many of which we see across the Commonwealth, even in some of even in our rural communities and urban communities. So much of what we've been discussing are specific. We're intentional in looking specifically at access in some of our most underrepresented communities.
You guys are doing some of the best work I've seen. I'm sure other states are doing great work on this too, about engaging your districts and your communities and kids and parents in this conversation about what do you want your plan to look like a year from now. So what have you learned in those conversations, and what are people telling you are most important, not quite as important?
Mm-hmm. So I think first what we've learned is the Commonwealth, we have some of the most passionate, educators you can find. I mean, the call to action, literally, our first call to action was we emailed 50 people and asked if they'd recommend 5 to 10, individuals to engage in this discussion, and we ended up with 400 names, in a week, and we took, we created a listening tour and then engaged work groups at the same time. So first, the passion resonated throughout the Commonwealth. Second, and this is a reminder I think it's important to share with everyone in the room. Educators, those of us that invest in this system of education, are highly intelligent. You don't always have to look 50 miles outside of your geographic area to find an expert or to find someone who's extremely, smart to engage in dialogue. So we were able to tap, some amazing local talent that was well researched and really engaged in the practice of education as well. And lastly, I think which was very refreshing, within the first 30 seconds of the conversation around equity assessment and instruction, the needs of students drove the narrative. So I think far too often when we have a conversation on education, it takes anywhere between minutes and hours to hear the word kids. I'm really proud in terms of the Commonwealth, within 30 seconds, we heard the word kids, and we're committed to focusing and serving them.
Yeah. And so as your team, so many of these folks are working for someone like you and trying to design a new system that better serves the needs of kids in their state. So what do you want from your team as they're in this conversation?
So I think, well, first, if you're working for someone like me in this room, I apologize now. I mean, but I think first and foremost, when we started engaging in this dialogue, we realized we have we say a once in a decade opportunity, but really with the pace education moves, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to transform how we view, how we engage, and how we invest in education. So first, when we pulled the internal work group together, the conversation really was, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and if we're going to do this right, we need to focus, as I shared earlier, with the narrative, why it is that we're engaging in this conversation, and really taking the education narrative back, in focusing on both the art and science of teaching, and know that ultimately, our responsibility as educators is to ensure that we're instilling the knowledge and meeting the standards that will, push, that will drive students to be college and career ready. And when we look at, for us, our state standards, across the Commonwealth, the alignment has to be, intentionally, focused on knowing what students and how students will be able to perform when they graduate from our systems of learning. And then we also are responsible for higher ed, and how we align what's happening in our K-12 system to one of, our traditional and non-traditional higher education tracks. Because this is, not just about educating the students that are in front of us, and the governor has been extremely supportive in this. This is an economic development issue. This is a civil rights issue. This is a community development issue. This is about transforming the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and all that in the name of these tests. Do you think we put too much pressure on sort of an end-of-year test, and are you thinking about how you might broaden that?
So as we look at graduation, as we've been measuring skill attainment throughout the course of the year, and then throughout the course of a student's K-12 career, we understand that there must be multiple pathways to identifying success. We're looking at our English language learner standards, and realize that here for us as a state, we never paid specific attention, or enough attention, I should say, to English language acquisition. And as a result, some of those programs suffered. Or industry certificates. So we had students who weren't performing well on a standardized assessment, so they were being pulled from a welding certificate class to take a remedial course to help score proficient on a standardized test. So for us, it took a student from an opportunity in which he can earn $40,000 to $60,000 a year starting to be remediated on on a standardized assessment. Now there are other ways to support the student in becoming industry certified, while at the same time working on deficiencies within that skill that they didn't perform well on. So we have to think differently around assessment and accountability in schools. I say for us across the Commonwealth, but as we've been noticing and learning from colleagues across the country.
Yeah, I could hear your passion around this topic, and we were talking beforehand about why this is important to you. So you want to talk a little bit about why you think, why you talked already in the speech about why we're giving these assessments and changing that narrative. But it seems to me your passion around it, making sure that every kid has access to high quality education, is essential. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's both a personal and professional mission for me. I think first professionally, having served, been an educator here in Philadelphia for most of my career, and then going to Lancaster, and now as a secretary visiting school districts across the Commonwealth, rural, urban, poor, wealthy. We realize that you see firsthand that education is the one true the equalizer. I mean, if we do a good job in educating students across our state, across our country, they will do a better job of investing in their families and their communities. And as we've heard stories of success, these are success that transcend the individual family unit to many families, and the individual student to generations of students. And then personally, as I shared, having not only taught here but grown up here, and having been first college graduate in my family, I've seen firsthand how education has provided me the opportunity to not only enrich myself professionally, but personally and culturally. I mean, I joke with folks, downtown, you're here in Center City, and it's great. I mean, it's amazing. And I grew up in North Philadelphia, and if you have an opportunity, if you have any free time, don't skip sessions. But if you have any free time, you visit the Art Museum. It's one of the most amazing spectacles. First, you can run up the stairs like Rocky did, which is always a big, but if you have heart problems and it's 90 degrees, don't run up the steps, please. But you run upstairs and you see the Art Museum. I didn't visit the Art Museum until I taught my first 7th grade class and grew up in this city. So when you think about who we are as educators, that's who we are. We give students the first opportunity to expose themselves culturally and educationally to the experiences that are going to shape who we are. We give them the opportunities to perform at levels that will make them successful as young adults into older adults. And then ultimately, that investment is probably one of the few investments we can count on that will multiply year after year and generations to generations. So it's a passion of ours.
It's good stuff. All right, last question. You've been a commissioner a year now, and it's clear your passion for this work is immense. What has given you hope in this first year? What have you seen that we should be building on? And what are the types of things that, if you can tie it to testing or assessment, that'd be great. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think first, the opportunities for states to engage in this conversation and lead the conversation locally is huge. It's a big opportunity. Mostly because, as educators, we know what drives instruction, what drives education, what drives the process of knowledge transfer between our systems and the students we serve. So I think what's probably most exciting is that we have an opportunity now to really drive the future of education at the foundational level. And we know, as with any movements that grow organically, tend to be much more sustainable over years than those that are top down. Yeah. Now, the caution and the fear in that is we are given an opportunity of a lifetime as educators. We have to be sure that we don't squander that opportunity. And we can't allow politics, and we can't allow fear of failure, and we can't allow squandering of resources to force us to waste this opportunity. So I think it's a great opportunity, as I shared, but the responsibility behind it is probably just as vast as the opportunity is.
That answer was so interesting. I have one more question. So, thinking about sustainability, because you touched on that. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that was hard for me when I was in a state agency is the changing of leadership, because we always felt like there was a new thing coming. And many of these folks have been in their agencies for multiple secretaries or superintendents or whatever it is in their state. So what are some things that we should be doing in agencies to make sure things live on beyond tenures?
First, I think that's one of the reasons that we've been engaging so many stakeholders. I think you really establish critical mass. The more individuals you come together and educate them around the process, and then engage them in the decision-making process moving forward. We truly believe, because of what we've done by engaging thousands of stakeholders across the Commonwealth, diverse in terms of geographic, socioeconomic, ethnic, opportunity, by creating this diverse set of stakeholders, we believe that this work will continue without us. And not only have they become our subject matter experts, but they have become our advocates. They have become our accountability system. And as a result, this conversation continues, whether or not we're facilitating the conversation or they are. So I think stakeholder engagement will help sustain it.
Please join me in thanking Secretary Rivera for being with us today. He could have been anywhere in Pennsylvania today, but he chose to be with us here, and he does need to go to another conversation, but I just couldn't thank you enough for being here. Enjoy the rest of the conference. We'll be back here tomorrow afternoon for another plenary, but have a great conference. Thank you.